Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me, taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, give him his own. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Today, we're actually broadcasting from the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. Within the last 18 months, government documents have been declassified that prove that the Central Intelligence Agency was well aware of the Watergate break-in before it happened, and that they infiltrated the Watergate burglar team. 4 of the 8 Watergate burglars were actively working for the Central Intelligence Agency. Senator Howard Baker, who was the ranking Republican on the Senate Watergate Committee, was well aware of the CIA's involvement of the takedown of Richard Nixon, but he was specifically prohibited by Senate Watergate Committee Chairman Sam Ervin from including that in his minority report. Nick Ackerman, you may have seen this guy on MSNBC, he tries to pretend like he's some kind of law enforcement official or prosecutor. In fact, he's a rabid left-wing prosecutor. Actually quoted as saying, "We know that Nixon knew in advance about the Watergate break-in. We could just never prove it." No, Nick, you didn't know anything of the kind. But it's interesting as the truth about Watergate becomes clearer and more obvious that Richard Nixon was taken down just as JFK was, just as they tried to assassinate President Ronald Reagan, just as they tried to keep Donald Trump off the ballot, bankrupt him, put him in jail, and ultimately tried at least twice, now maybe even 3 times, considering last weekend, to assassinate him. This, to me, proves the existence of a deep state. President Dwight Eisenhower warned us about this. He called it the military-industrial complex, but in his farewell address to the American people, he warned us about the accumulation of power by unelected bureaucrats and others who have, in fact, since 1963, I think, affected America's government and the American position. In any event, it's glad to see the truth is finally coming out. For anybody who was paying attention, you may have noticed last week that as a condition of his presidential pardon, President Richard Nixon was required to give 6 hours of sworn testimony before a grand jury on various topics. But one section of that testimony was, until days ago, classified and sealed. We now know that the deep state, specifically the Joint Chiefs, had an active spying operation in the Nixon White House, and that Nixon and his Secretary of State, or initially his National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, were being spied on by the Defense Department. That there was a naval yeoman named Radford who was photographing documents, rifling through file drawers, desks. He even went through Henry Kissinger's briefcase to spy on Nixon. Why? Very simple. Because the deep state was opposed to ending the war in Vietnam. It was, after all, extraordinarily profitable for the defense contractors. They were opposed to a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets, which Nixon was able to negotiate. And of course, they were opposed to opening the door to China. Now, critics of Nixon blame Nixon for the fact that China is today a danger to the United States, not recognizing that when Richard Nixon opened the door to China, it was a backwards, dirt-poor agrarian society where few people had indoor plumbing and where the rural areas didn't even have electricity. No, it was Bill Clinton who gave most favored nation trading status to the Chinese 30 years later that would make them the great economic and military danger that they are today.
Rural Americans deserve access to the best our nation has to offer, especially when it comes to health care. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families' health. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.